Let's take a minute to recap all that you have learned in this course. .50A1 and .50A2 have been combined into NC 50A2. One notable change in the content of this standard is that students are no longer required to solve order of operation problems with brackets or braces. Parentheses are the only grouping symbols students need to use and understand. Another significant change is that the order of operations problems are now two-step only. Students are not expected to solve problems with more than 2 steps. In addition to combining 5NBT1 and 5NBT2, the new standard NC 5NBT1 no longer includes exponents. Students will continue to explore the idea that a digit has a value which is 10 times more than the same digit to the right and 1/10 of the same digit to the left. Students also explore patterns when numbers are multiplied by 1,000, 100, 10, 1/10, and 100th, or divided by 10 or 100. This example is taken from the CMS 5th grade curriculum guides. In Common Core State Standards, 5th grade students were not expected to use or see the U.S. Standard algorithm for division. The new standard continues to expect that students use rectangular arrays, area models, repeated subtraction, and/or the relationship between multiplication and division. It is important that students have opportunities to see and use these strategies. The change here is that students also can see the U.S. Standard algorithm and make connections to other strategies. Mastery of the U.S. Standard algorithm for division is still not expected until 6th grade. Students are still expected to use models, drawings, and place value strategies to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with decimals. Students can use base 10 blocks, money, decimal grids, and number lines as tools to compute with decimals. Two notable changes are the embedding of 5NBT4 into NC 5NBT7 as estimation strategies, and the new parameters around dividing with decimals. Decimal division for 5th grade is now limited to dividing a whole number by a decimal or a decimal by a whole number. Also, numbers are limited to hundredths. In other words, students divide tenths or hundredths by whole number or a whole number by tenths or hundredths. 5NF1 and 5NF2 have been combined into NC 5NF1. An important change to keep in mind is that students are no longer expected to add fractions and mixed numbers with unlike denominators when both fractions and mixed numbers need an equivalent fraction in order to add or subtract. Now, only one of the fractions will need to be rewritten as an equivalent fraction in order to add or subtract the two fractions. Related fractions expected in this standard are listed explicitly. Students may add or subtract halves, fourths, and eighths together. Students may add or subtract thirds, sixths, and twelfths together, or students may add and subtract fifths, tenths, and hundredths together. Addition and subtraction problems may either be one-step or two-step problems. NC 5NF3 is very similar to the original standard. The important change is the limitation on the denominators that could possibly appear in these problems. Also, student strategies are listed much more explicitly. Students are expected to use area, length, and set models. These were expected in the original standard, but they were grouped as visual fraction models. .5NF4, 5NF5, and 5NF6 are all related to multiplying fractions. All three standards have been combined into one standard, NC 5NF4. Both in Common Core and now with the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, students are expected to use visual models to multiply fractions and mixed numbers. The most significant change is that denominators are limited to halves, thirds, and fourths to make the creation of visual models easier. Students are not expected to master the U.S. Standard algorithm for multiplying fractions, though students may notice and develop the algorithm. Previously, students might have multiplied halves times fifths. Now students only multiply halves, thirds, and fourths. NC 5NF7 is very similar to the original standard. The major change here is the limitation to one-step word problems. Note that there is not a denominator limitation on this standard, since students will be dividing a whole number or dividing by a whole number. Fifth grade students are still responsible for converting from both smaller to larger units and larger to smaller units within the same system. Units may be either metric or customary. The major difference in this standard is the inclusion of a conversion chart. Students do not need to memorize conversions, but they must know how to convert between units when a conversion chart is provided. 5MD2 is one of the most dramatically changing standards in grade 5. Originally, this standard involved measuring and recording the measurement data in a line plot. Data was recorded to the nearest eighth of an inch. NC 5MD2 focuses on collecting data that changes over time, representing that data in a line graph and interpreting the data based on the line graph. The task shown here represents the interpreting aspect of this standard. Students will need to create survey questions that yield data that changes over time, collect the data, and create line graphs. This builds on previous work in grades 3 and 4 where students focus on categorical data and numeric data respectively. By 5th grade, students should be able to distinguish between questions that yield these three types of data. 5MD3 and 5MD4 have been combined into the standard NC 5MD4, but the content of the standards is the same. 5MD5 does include a notable change. Students previously solved problems involving additive volume, but there were no parameters around the side lengths. NC 5MD5 limits to one-digit dimensions for problems involving additive volume. The major change in 5th grade geometry standards is the combination of 5G1 and 5G2 and the combination of 5G3 and 5G4. You may have also noticed that NC 5G3 focuses on quadrilaterals, where previously the standards mentioned all two-dimensional figures. Assessment items in the standard will most likely focus on quadrilaterals only, but other two-dimensional shapes have been explored in previous grade levels, so keep in mind that it would be considered fair if another two-dimensional shape was included in an assessment item. Next, you will take a 10-question quiz on the changes in the standards. Be sure that you have participated in all discussions and make at least an 80% on the quiz to receive credit for this course. You are able to retake the quiz one time as needed. Thank you for participating in this course.